doing?
You know, we're actually doing okay. We are in the middle of final exams. The torts exam was yesterday, and it was all online. Kind of a new experience for everybody, but things are going okay. We didn't have too many issues. We unfortunately did lose the internet in Davis for 2 hours in the morning, but we worked through it.
Hey, Emily, if I could just take just a moment of your time before we formally start here. What are you doing to preserve the integrity of the exam with these take-home online? Are you making them open book with unlimited time, or how are you monitoring the exam process?
Yeah, so we have a couple of things. We have our honor code, and we have some specific exam instructions for students. They have to sign in and agree to every time they're taking the exam. But they also, all of our faculty are aware that we decided not to do webcam proctoring for this go around. It doesn't mean we won't do it later, but so they are open book, open note exams, and they are written based on sort of that premise.
Wow.
So, but the students have really been, I mean, you know, as much as we've tried to ease their stress level, they want to show the professors what they know. So,
Okay, because you know the court and the board and CBE, we're all grappling with the bar exam in the future, and so I guess you've decided not to do any online, or you didn't do any online proctoring, no verification that the person taking the exam is actually the student, and no monitoring of the exam while it's taking place, huh?
That's correct. Yeah. And again, we'll look at options for fall, but we do open book exams and take-home exams a lot. So this was not something that we were that concerned about. But I did see the email that came from the State Bar asking for schools that have in fact used the web proctoring program. And I've talked with a lot of deans of students across the country that have set that up. And there are a few in California. So hopefully the State Bar will get some good information from that.
Well, one of the biggest WIG deans I know is right here. He's eating nuts or something, Dean Ferrillo. Hey, would you mind, Dean, before we start, what are your students doing for their exams?
Hey, Robbie.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
We may have people from the public who are listening in, and we may want to go offline with this and get started. So that
okay, sorry, I apologize. That was
Robbie, I'd be glad to answer offline, however you would like.
Okay, thanks, Dean.
At your convenience.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name's Alan Steinbrecher. I'm the chair of the California Attorney Practice Analysis Working Group, a group that's been working very hard over the last couple of years to examine the existing bar exam in connection with the work that entry-level attorneys actually perform in California. We have had a session a couple of weeks ago where we were presented with a virtually final draft of the report. We discussed it, and there were a few comments raised about some perhaps either elucidation of a couple of points or addition of a couple of ideas. A small working group was formed, including Dean Ferrillo, Dean Scivoletto, and Ms. Buffington. And their work has been done. We have a revised draft that's been submitted to all of the committee members, and we are prepared today to talk about that revised draft, and we expect to be able to approve it with or without modifications that may be suggested. But of course, the meeting will determine all of that. The first order of business after the welcome is to call for public comment. Is there anyone from the public who would like to address the committee before we begin our business meeting? All right. Mr. McLeod, are you running the switchboard there, so to speak?
Running it. This is Ron. I'm running this.
You're running it, Ron? Okay.
Yes.
Do you have any indication that anyone from the public would like to speak?
No hands raised that I can see.
All right. Very good. Thank you. All right, then let's close public comment and move into the business portion of the meeting. I understand, Ron, that you're going to lead it off, and if that's correct, please take the reins.
Yeah, I hope you have had a chance to review this latest version with the revisions provided by Dean Ferrolo, Dean Scladdle, and Sinead Buffington. There are three major areas where they made some additional edits and clarifying some points. One is regarding recommending the adoption of the construct statement that was proposed as the foundation for further defining the minimum competence. And also in clarifying the recommendations regarding legal topics and competencies, there were some additional edits to clarify the rationale for making those recommendations. We were happy about the edits and we received some additional comments. The additional comments from Leah were very helpful also, trying to think whether there are some areas or any issues that can be further clarified, strengthened. The purpose of this meeting is to gather some additional inputs on those, perhaps focus on those major points where there's the working group recommendations. Are there questions about those additional edits related to recommendations 1, 2, 3, those 3 points?
It might be helpful, Ron, if you pointed the committee members who were not on the working group to the exact places where those changes were made. I haven't seen a red line. I have read it and it certainly looked fine to me, but if there are any committee members who are unsure where the changes have been made and what they are, it might be helpful just to give them a summary by page reference.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
The recommendation 1 here, you can see the screen okay?
Yes.
It's about the language and definition for future bar exam studies. Here you can see the construct statement. The California bar examination assesses legal knowledge, competency areas, and professional skills required for the entry-level practice of law and the effective ethical representation of clients. As recall, this was the starting point in defining the scope of the bar exam in this very high-level language, and then the working group followed this definition to further go into the data to evaluate the composite ratings. And the purpose of adopting this construct statement is from this construct statement to a more granular or operationalized minimum competence, where the minimum competence definition can be used later on as part of the grading rubric, as well as the basis for standard setting cut score study. This is helpful, and this is actually also one of the original purposes that we laid out for a CAPA study. So that's recommendation number 1. Legal topics here where the additional edits were inserted. The narrative was added mainly to clarify the rationale in determining what to include and not include in considering the balance of the different factors, primarily driven by the data on composite ratings, and then also considering other policy or program options related to, for example, professional ethics, or some of the core foundational knowledge that's considered important as either training or as the fundamental ability for legal analysis. And that point is also related to recommendation number 3 that was further clarified here, competency and professional skill, you can see the language is the same as the one laid out in construct statement. And the main point added here in competency is to emphasize that balance in the depth of knowledge and in applying the knowledge in performing the task. So based on the competency composite ratings, the emphasis is on drafting, writing, research, investigation. The point made here was these are professional skills that's important to be tested on the bar exam. And the legal topics, in addition to what's considered important based on CAPA composite ratings, but also the additional foundational core concepts, all of them together will be appropriate as a balance to test these fundamental legal skills as captured in the competency. So those are the additional points inserted to strengthen the argument about the recommendations number 1 and 2 in terms of the legal topics and competencies. So that's where the additional points made it to clarify the balance in considering multiple factors.
Okay, great. Any of the three, Dean Furlow, or any of the others who were on the redrafting working group have any additional comments that they would like to make?
This is Sinead Buffington. I have some additional edits. I've been swamped with work and other stuff, so I can get those in to Ron this weekend. In fact, I was under the impression that we were going to meet after today to finalize the report, but I could be mistaken. I know Dean Ferrillo and Dean Scivoletto, they got their comments in. I just was not able to get mine in.
Well,
Sinead, I incorporated your comments about the administrative law section in the recommendation. And of course, we also talked about incorporating the additional comments in different sections of the report. We're open to spending a couple more days over the weekend or early next week to finalize the additional the edits that we have got the feedback, or anything else from the group that we'll be able to incorporate in the final revision.
Are you talking about the working group, or are you talking about just the small working group?
Small working group, and any additional comments and feedback you have, it'd be helpful to let us know and talk about it, talk it through now, so that the small working group can consider.
are you planning on having a final meeting to finally approve the final report? Ron?
Depending on the scope of the revision at this point, based on the comments we received, they didn't seem to involve substantial revisions substantively on the content. Myself don't see the need for that final meeting, but certainly we can circulate the final version before releasing it.
I'm confused. Are the members of the larger working group supposed to offer comments now or not?
No, I'm gonna, yeah, now.
Okay.
Anybody on the committee or working group who has any comments now, please, please hear everybody. Yes, Greg.
I noted at the executive summary that it says that the State Bar established the working group. Was that the State Bar or the Supreme Court? Or maybe it's the same thing under California law. I know it's a state agency now.
Members were appointed and approved by the Supreme Court.
Yeah, but I thought the working group itself was established by the Supreme Court. Am I incorrect on that? I may be wrong.
Yeah, the board established the working group.
The board, okay, thank you. Then I just have one substantive recommendation. On recommendation 3, this is in the executive summary. the group is recommending to the court that the competencies be tested on the bar examination, assessed is the word used. And I expressed some reservation before about my concern about whether that can be done reliably under the current state of the art. Maybe it can be, but we know from the reliability testing on at least 6 of the 7 or 7 of the subjects that we've tested through the MBE that it's a pretty reliable test. The coefficient reliability is often above 0.90. It's 0.92 is a typical measure. And as far as I know, the kinds of things like drafting and writing, research, investigation, there's no current test that way. And I'm not saying one can't be developed, but it seems to me that we should put a caveat that that it be assessed on the bar exam if it can be assessed reliably in a high stakes examination like the bar exam. And that's important because I think that, and I think Dr. Henderson might agree that high stakes examination should receive a coefficient reliability above, well, I think isn't 0.85 the standard now generally in the industry, Dr. Henderson?
Mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, 0.85 is the standard for high stakes test where decisions are made about individuals, such as a licensure test. So
my point, I would just add to that phrase at the end of the executive recommendation 3, it says, the working group identifies 6 broad areas as the most relevant competencies and recommends that these be assessed by the bar exam. And I would add a phrase, if they can be assessed with sufficient reliability for a high stakes examination, or worse to that effect.
Does anyone have any comments on that proposed addition for consideration? Okay.
Sorry, this is Emily. Sometimes when you call one out, you may then be excluding others. And so I would hope that any testing we're doing would be reliable testing. I get that this particular area is, it's hard to test. So I guess I would maybe minimize, I'm fine with it. I would just say maybe minimize the insert and just say as long, reliably tested by the bar exam or in a reliable manner or something. I just don't want to call attention too much, I don't think, unless we want to put it everywhere, because we have not touched on what type of testing is going to be done at all. And so that's just what concerns me. So I don't have a problem necessarily. I just don't want to call it out too much that this is, you know what I'm saying?
It's fair comment. I wouldn't be opposed to adding that to the section on topics, although as I mentioned before, we know at least in terms of the multi-state bar exam, and you may go away from the multi-state bar exam, I understand that's a possibility, but whatever objective test you have, it's likely to, if it's properly constructed and you have appropriate equators and all that, we hope it develops sufficient reliability. These other areas are more difficult, and for those, I wouldn't want the working group not to avoid that issue, in the sense that you really got to look at that question in the construct of the future exam. Somebody's going to say, what does that mean? I mean, you could put in psychometric reliability, in psychometrically of a reliable fashion or something like that. I mean, when we talked earlier, Dr. Henderson had commented he understood that the bars in California, you had to pass 2 sections. Well, in fact, I think that California, like most states, takes the essay scores, which are unfortunately don't have the reliability of the objective test, and spreads them on the objective test, and that mitigates some of the effects of the unreliability of essay scores. But you've got 2 days right now to test in this high stakes examination, and it's very difficult to do that reliably without a significant objective component. And these other areas, these competencies, are not readily as easy to develop that objective test, because the divergence of views on well, even the standards on council advice, drafting and writing and the like.
If I may clarify on the points of reliability, I think that there's no disagreement about reliability being one of the most important attributes of an exam that we should all consider. And then any revisions of the format would consider that as an important element. And also the essay and written PT portion, the reliability score usually runs from 0.75 to 0.8. I wouldn't say it's unreliable. It's just less reliable. It's simply a function of the number of questions. And the reason we use MBE, not so much because MBE is more reliable, it's primarily because the equating process in MBE, given the number of questions, that's why using that as an anchor for scaling the written portion, that's a more important property of the scaling process, just to clarify a little bit.
Well, the equators are key to the assessment of the reliability examination, because it's the performance on the equators versus the other questions that give you that help you do that analysis. I don't care if I understand Emily's point about not highlighting it in the competencies areas, although I think it may deserve it in those areas. But I think somewhere in the report, if you just say generally, the examination should meet psychometric standards, including reliability. The group was tasked to look at the validity of the examination as what ought to be tested, and certainly, the things we've identified as the competencies are things that ought to be tested if they could be tested. Maybe it's also said if it can be tested reliably, because a test that didn't meet reliable psychometric standards for reliability would not be a valid test.
It's Stephen. I just want to put this in the context of the discussion that took place last Friday. I listened to most of the discussion last Friday at the Committee of Bar Examiners. And there's certainly some confusion out there because it came up more than once, and I think Leah answered the question pretty effectively. Well, what assumption does this make about, the MBE or about the UBE and things like that? And I think Leah's response was pretty much, we're not really addressing here the format of the exam, or assuming that it is the current format of the exam with and all that kind of stuff. We're dealing with this broad issue. What should be tested in terms of doctrinal areas and in terms of skills areas. And so if we put in a statement along the lines that you're suggesting, I think it should be a general statement, okay, that we're not addressing methods of testing or the current way testing which is done. And all of these are going to have to be dealt with in the context of thinking about ways to test both the doctrinal areas and the skills in reliable ways. And that's a separate issue from what we're addressing. So if there's a statement like that, I think it should be a general statement somewhere. I think it might be helpful to add in the context of introducing this, because I think there's some confusion that was expressed last week during the sessions that I was on with the CBE.
Yeah, if I may just respond briefly, I agree with you, Stephen. I mean, I just like a general statement on that, because otherwise we put too much emphasis on the bar examination, right? I mean, good arguments being made that law schools, accredited law schools, do a sufficient job in areas we really don't feel confident we can measure with current technology. Maybe the future will hold promise for us, but so a general statement would be fine too, but it should apply across the board. Every part of a high stakes examination should be reliable.
That sounds good to me.
Okay. Any other comments on the report from any member of the working group? Leah?
Well, I'm not a member of the working group, Alan.
Oh, or consultants too, or working with.
I agreed with that comment, and I just wanted to make sure, Ron, you got that, so it would be like a general statement that would be added at the beginning or the end, but not specific to one of the recommendations.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I had thought, Ron, you had identified kind of 3 issues to be addressed, sort of separate and apart from the 3 recommendations. Do you feel like we've covered that in your?
Yes, those 3 points are related to the 3 recommendations.
Okay.
Just Jackie, as a general comment, I thought the additions made about, and I think this came from Emily's recommendation at the last meeting, to really flesh out the conversations that occurred within the working group to provide more context for some of the decisions that were made, were effective as additions to the report. So thank you for that.
Okay.
So, Ron, it sounds like there's a few more edits to make. And Shanae, it sounds like we're going to get some more edits from you.
Yes.
That's correct. By this weekend, I'll get it in. The work is not stopped at the EDD. So
Okay.
I'm trying to do this and
Yeah.
work.
So maybe, Ron, after we take a look at that, we'll reach back out, Alan, and see if there's a need for another full group meeting, or if just the smaller group that's been working on their rewrites can handle incorporation of the additional revisions.
Sure. Yes.
Okay.
Ron, do you have anything else you'd like to bring to the committee's, or excuse me, the working group's attention at this point?
Beyond just completing the final working group report, the next step, to give you an update, is we're gonna present this along with other bar exam related studies to the board at the board meeting on May 14th. So all of them packaged together as a series of bar exam related studies with concrete recommendations coming out of all of those studies as the next step. So some of them fall into the category of short-term actions that can be taken, largely related to bar exam administrative aspects, and others are related to long-term policy questions that needs to be addressed by a separate body. So that's, all of these are part of the concerted effort to improve the bar exam as the next step. And CAPA certainly is a very important part of the whole effort. And I really appreciate everyone over the past 1 year contributing to this very important project.
Okay. All right, for proceeding then, we have Shanae's additional comments, and we have the language that has been suggested. Does anyone have any other comments at this point? Suggestions, comments, opinions, or anything? Robbie?
No, I don't. I won't.
Okay. All right. Does anyone feel that they, under any circumstances, want to have another meeting to consider the next revision, hopefully final revision of this report? Or are you willing to defer to Ron, Jim, Leah, and the small working group that suggested these redrafts to determine whether any are substantive or not, and therefore whether we need another meeting or not, or leave it in the hands of that group to decide?
Alan, this is Robbie. I'm inclined, if Shanae's minor revisions are in line with what we talked about today, then another full meeting I don't think is necessary. I certainly would delegate the authority to that small group if it's like we discussed today. That's my opinion.
Okay.
I'm of view that we may not need a new meeting, but I'd sure like to see the final one after it's amended. And maybe we could just have do you think we ought to, do you agree or not? Or do you object? I wouldn't schedule a meeting until it's circulated. Give people 1 or 2 days to take a look at it.
Right.
Yeah, like a good idea.
Yeah. Okay. So, Ron, why don't we do this? Why don't you accept any or get any further information from Shanae or anyone else who gets something to you within the next day or two? Incorporate those, create a redlined version, send it out to all the members of the working committee, the working group, for their review with a fairly limited time frame to get back to you whether they believe the changes are substantive enough to warrant a further discussion. But if all of that happens and nobody feels that the changes are substantive enough, do I have a consensus? I believe I have a consensus that this report, as maybe subsequently not materially changed, will be the final report of the working group. Anyone object to that?
I'm in agreement with that.
Pardon me, Robbie?
I'm in agreement with that.
Oh, okay, thank you. I see some thumbs up. I don't see any thumbs down. Thumbs up, okay. All right, then that's what we'll do. Is that somewhat clear, Ron?
Yes, that's all I have. And we
Okay,
certainly,
great.
yeah, I'll certainly reach out to gather the additional edits and circulate the redlined version as soon as it's ready.
Okay. Well, for all of the thousands of public members of the public who are attending this, I'm sure, I do want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who has worked so hard on this project. The members of this working group, the members of the panel that was formed to supplement the work of the working group, Jim Henderson, Ron Pye, Eli Wallach, Leah, everyone throughout who has up and down the staff and so forth who've contributed to this project. It's been a really significant effort. This fits in with the other three bar exam studies that have been conducted, and of course, frankly, is the foundational study. So it has been a terrific effort, and I think we have a very fine product. So unless anyone has any other sayonaras or alohas, we will adjourn the meeting. Anyone?
Everyone.
Thank
All righty. Thank
I
you.
also want to take the opportunity to thank Jim Henderson for his contribution to making this very successful.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Yes, indeed, Jim.
Thank you, Dr. Henderson.
And you, Ron, as well.
Thank you.
And if I may, I'd like to compliment the group. I feel like you have brought a level of commitment and understanding and intelligence to this process that really is without parallel. So you've been fantastic in the way that you've guided the process and made your decisions. And I think you've done a beautiful, beautiful job. So thank you.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank
All
you.
right, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Out to you later, Dean Ferrella.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yes, please, anytime, Robbie.
Okay, thanks you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.